Oh yeah. Hey yo, it's the Russo Show. Hey yo, it's the Russo Show.
Hello everyone and welcome to Pizza Film School. This season we're exploring the world of AGBO's essential creative partners. These talented individuals work their magic behind the scenes, contributing their expertise to the variety of components involved in creating a film.
Today we have the pleasure of welcoming our dear friend and renowned camera operator, Geoff Haley. As a two-time Camera Operator of the Year award winner for his outstanding work in Cherry and Joker, Geoff has left an indelible mark on the industry. Over the past 2 decades, he has contributed to blockbuster franchises such as Fast and Furious and The Avengers, as well as fantastic films like American Hustle, The Hangover, Steve Jobs, Easy A, and Star Trek Beyond. Geoff's expertise in capturing both epic and intimate moments has earned him a reputation as one of the industry's leading camera and Steadicam operators. We are thrilled to introduce Geoff and delve into some fantastic filmmaking techniques in this episode.
Jeffrey, how are you? Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super thrilled to be here.
Glad that you're going to share some pizza with us today. Just to let everybody know, our pizza is from Pizza Say on Pico and Robertson in West LA. This popular pizza shop specializes in Tokyo-style Neapolitan pizza. There's a big pizza scene. We both know this, Anthony, in Tokyo.
I'm not embarrassed to say that the first food I eat when I get off the plane in Tokyo is pizza.
Haley, do you have a favorite pizza spot in LA?
Well, I'm going to say first, I am embarrassed to say that the one thing during my time in Tokyo that I never ate in Tokyo was pizza. So now I feel like I don't belong here. Okay. My favorite pizza spot in LA is actually my house because I make pizza on the patio with a little pizza oven sort of a thing. We try to do it every Friday.
Okay, well, you're like a Tokyo pizza man.
We'll see you Friday, apparently.
Exactly.
So, while we mange, tell us a little bit about how you got into the business. What was your segue? There's a very famous shot behind.
Well, okay. I mean, I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible, but I'll start from the beginning. First, the earth cooled, right?
Yes.
I grew up in a little village in the southern part of Germany and moved to the States when I was 8 years old. I've always, from an early childhood age, had 2 loves. One was music. I was a cellist starting from age 5 years old on. And I've always loved movies. And I was the kid who, instead of turning in book reports when I was 10 years old or 11 years old in school, I would play the class the movies, essentially, that we shot.
Wow.
So I loved both music and film, and I had to make a decision which path I wanted to go when I was in high school. I thought about possibly becoming a cellist professionally, but made the decision at the last second that I was going to potentially resent music if that was going to be the way I made money. And I was a little bit too worried about destroying my love for music. So you
decided to destroy your love of film.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's easy to destroy a love of film because then you get it right back the next week. That's really great. So, but music, it's a little bit different. I do a lot of teaching, like guest lecturing at film schools. And the biggest question that I get, was it a good idea to go to film school? Which is a crazy, crazy question to ask me because I am here teaching them at film school. So if I were to say, no, it's a terrible idea, then they're going to resent me.
But let's ask this question.
Yeah.
Outside of school, you're not in front of students right now.
Right.
Is going to film school a good idea?
Well, what I did, I made the decision not to go to film school, but I went to a school to get a different degree in psychophysiology. But even though my family was on the East Coast, I made the decision to go to a school that had really no film program to speak of, but it was on the West Coast, and that I could spend my summers going to LA and working on movies.
Oh, wow.
And so I went ahead and got my bachelor's and master's in something that I initially thought would have absolutely nothing to do with film, even though it turned out it has a lot to do with film. And I've been using what I've studied and the types of stuff that I was researching in my career way more than I could ever have imagined. And so the answer I usually give to the question is that you could theoretically learn a lot of the things that you're going to be learning at film school on the job, which is essentially what I did, right? I spent my 4 summers working on movies, and I would say that I probably learned as much about making films after 2 summers of working on movies as I might have after a 2-year program. One of the reasons why I didn't go to film school is because a friend of mine thought it was more important to learn what to make a movie about before you learn how to make a movie.
How would you interpret that? What does that mean to you?
You need to go and learn about yourself and learn about the stories you want to tell and have an opinion and a position on the world. That's why I went to study something that was more about the human condition. I didn't study film, I studied something about people and how people react to the environment and psychology. And that formed in my brain sort of the template for what it is that I wanted to tell if and when I got a chance to tell that story.
Speaking of that, do you remember, you know, having been so fond of filmmaking as a kid and having a camera, was there a moment that was particularly meaningful to you, that an experience you had with the camera, something you shot or something you showed somebody that stayed with you?
I think when I made my book report on The Old Man and the Sea, which was my third book report I think I did, which was I think, I don't know, age 12 or something like that. I remember watching the cut together 8mm film, and I remember thinking like, this is so much more interesting and so much better than what I thought I was shooting. I mean, it was crap, obviously, right? But it was much less crappy than I was expecting it to be while I was shooting it. And it was just my friends and I, you know, having rented a rowboat, acting out as best as we could the story of The Old Man and the Sea. But I learned how to use editing and music to create something that I was really kind of stunned by. And I think that was one of the first moments where I realized that first, filmmaking is way more complex than I ever thought it could be, but that it's also this wonderful living thing.
That's amazing.
Can you tell me the American Beauty story?
I started in sound because of my music background. And a year after I graduated from college, I was still doing sound, and I started to transition into camera operating, into Steadicam, because I really loved the Steadicam because of how physical it is and creative. And I got this weird job to shoot the video elements of a lower budget movie because I was in the sound union and I wasn't in the camera union yet. And so one thing I could do was operate video cameras on set. Your friend, Mr. Soderbergh, hired me on like the Ocean's movies and so on to shoot all of the video elements that would go into like...
The burn-ins on the screens.
Exactly, all that sort of stuff. So I got this job to shoot the video elements on this movie called American Beauty. And it was a first-time director, Sam Mendes, and the script was very interesting, but it read strangely on the page, for sure. So my job was to film all these different elements on the movie that were being theoretically filmed by the Wes Bentley character because he was an amateur videographer.
Right.
And so that the actors could have something to play against when we were going to shoot the scene of the Wes Bentley character showing the Thora Birch character the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. They wanted the actors to be able to see something on the television, knowing full well that it was going to be a CG replacement of, you know, it was like the feather in Forrest Gump. It was going to be something because it was described in the script as the most beautiful thing somebody had ever seen, right? You can't leave that up.
Thinking you would have to keep chasing that throughout
exactly,
forever.
That's right. Yeah. I rented 2 leaf blowers from Home Depot, and I had 2 college buddies of mine who had no idea what the heck they were out there for, and I was telling them, like, look, I had this thing, and I had to shoot a bag, and that maybe if we had a reverse version of a tug of war, where we had a blow-a-war with 2 people with 2 leaf blowers, and they basically tried to push this bag around, and I would just film it. And I had all this prep done, and I was driving and getting there, and I had forgotten the star of the movie. I had forgotten that I didn't have a bag. And I frantically looked around the back of my car and I saw there was literally a white paper bag for Chinese takeout like several weeks before. I tried to erase as many of the stains as possible. And the crazy thing is, the music is what makes that sequence. Like Thomas Newman's haunting score of that sequence is everything. Because if you were to hear the production sound of me yelling at my two friends saying, no, push it over to the right, and it's two gas-powered leaf blowers. It was horrible. In fact, it was such a horrible sound that about 20 minutes into my trying to get a 1 minute long take, right, that was going to be able to work, I hear the siren of the police car. And I actually pan over to it because you see that there's a police car that has arrived. Somebody, of course, called the cops on me.
And you've got leaf blowers going.
I've got leaf blowers going, and so the cop pulls me over and he asks me what I'm doing. I have to think fast because this was not permitted, and I couldn't tell them that I was working for DreamWorks because then the studio could have gotten in trouble. So I did the best thing that I could. I said I was a USC film student and been filming my thesis.
Yeah. And you were arrested. And
exactly, and I spent 20 years in prison. I mean, it was such a ridiculous thing to shoot, but I could see the police officer looking at the bag and looking at the leaf blowers and going like, yeah, typical, of course.
Yes,
of course it's a film.
Yeah. Now, before we jump into, we want to talk about some scenes with you. Just do a breakdown for all the folks watching Pizza Film School. Before we do, give me your definition of what it is that you do on set.
Well, the official definition of what I do on set is I move an imaginary rectangle around people's heads.
Is imaginary?
It is imaginary. It's not a real rectangle, right? In fact, it's so imaginary that oftentimes the rectangle doesn't even survive to the point where it gets shown to people. In fact, at the very last second, the rectangle can be curated and picked over and just wonderfully created. And right before it gets shown to a theater full of 300 people, the 16-year-old that's actually framing it might change my rectangle.
The projector?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, now I'm remembering, this is exactly what you said in our first interview we had. And we were, right after you said that, we're like, he's hired.
This guy's going to be driving around the country beating up 16-year-olds
exactly.
for poor framing on their projectors.
The imaginary rectangle.
No, look, I mean, to answer your question a little bit more seriously, I feel like it's the best job on this set. And I've had directors, Jay Roach and a couple other folks who I've worked with, who have come up to me and said, I know that you have the best job on this set. I get to have a dialogue with the actors, with the directors, with the DP, with all of the creative folks that are basically putting the story together.
I mean, it is a really powerful way to think about it, you know, is that you are the gatekeeper, really, to the movie. That's where the movie segues into being a movie.
Yeah, the narrative, the storyteller on the very front line of the movie. And, I mean, we've been very fortunate because you're 6-time nominated Camera Operator of the Year. You've won it twice. And we've been able to hoard you for the last decade to work with us now, not exclusively, but we've been very fortunate that we've done a lot of great projects together. Let's talk a little bit about just how you prepare for a film. Is it different with us than with other directors? I know that we are now in a place where you work also as an executive producer with us. It's how much we value your storytelling skills and how early we want you involved in the process as we fashion a story, as a project unfolds.
So people understand that point more clearly. You know, when Geoff works as an executive producer on our projects, it creates a larger space where he is present in the process.
During the prep, during the execution, and into post.
And arguably prep, I mean, many people have said it, but prep is oftentimes when the movie really is made. To answer your question, as far as what I do to prepare, obviously the first thing you do is you read the script, if there's a script to be read, and you educate yourself on every single thing that your collaborators have done. In my job, it's very, very important for me to know, especially the director, but also potentially the actor, and to a degree the director of photography, what they're bringing to the table. And the best way to do that is just to see everything that they've done so that you can get a jump start on the dialogue, on the conversation.
Now, seeing their sensibility, because you're the conduit, right? You're trying to help the vision that's in their head reach the screen, and as Ann said, you're sort of the critical piece, because it is a subjective craft. Whatever you frame is what you see. That's what you're communicating. It can change the emotion that you're feeling. It can change the story. You know, it could change the perspective that the audience has on the character. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of nuance that goes into operating.
Well, there is, and I would say that we had this lovely set, I think it was 2 sessions or maybe even 3, where we sat, talked about the movie, and we looked at clips, and we looked at images, and we looked at art, and we talked about everything for hours.
As a way to communicate information,
Feel out ideas.
Yeah.
What we were feeling about the movie, what our expectations were from an execution standpoint, what we wanted to communicate to the audience. That's all critical for us. The script development process is paramount with us because that's where we do all of our ideating.
Yeah.
We use the script as to force ideation, to get people in a room to have conversations. So we'll read it out loud, we'll talk about it, we'll look at clips, we'll be inspired by other films, we'll be inspired by artwork, frames from other movies where we can talk about lighting. So it is a really intense process of preparing. Tell me the difference between preparing for dramatic scenes versus action scenes. How does your prep change between those two?
Okay, well, let me address that in a slightly circuitous way.
Please.
Because, look, people don't just take a bus to Hollywood and become successful directors. You're always going to be working at a certain level for somebody, right? You need to figure out a way to develop your network. And your network is very much about how do you work for somebody that is essentially your boss. And on a creative level, that's really difficult. So one of the reasons why it was so valuable to be in the room with you guys and hearing you talk about the things that you talked about was that it gave me an opportunity to learn how to communicate with you. And so that's why having the kind of conversation that seems innocuous at first is probably more important than knowing exactly how they plan on shooting the movie. Because especially with you two, you're so iterative that you have to be ready for anything. The most important thing is for us to be able to get from idea 1 to idea 2 to idea 3 as quickly and efficiently as possible, because time is money when we're on set.
That's right.
So if I know how to communicate with you and you know how to understand me, then we can go through that ideation so much more quickly than if we're having to sort of hobble our way.
Well, there's like a philosophical fidelity that we have to the best idea, right? And the best idea can happen very early in prep. It can happen while you're on set. It can happen on take 11. It could happen in post. So you never know when that best idea is going to arrive. You just want to stay available the whole time to the best idea. That's how we like to work.
It can happen 3 weeks before the movie's released.
That's right.
To hear you say that is fascinating, and part of the reason why you are so successful and effective with what you do is because you have a very layered, dimensional understanding of what the process is and how to make the most of what that process is. Joe and I love actors, we love performances. We lean on performance a lot as a source of structure. And to see you work with actors has been fascinating to me, because we'll sit at the monitor, we'll watch a shot unfold, we'll see what the performer is doing, and the way that you are able to adjust to it and sort of the very subtle movements that you bring into, I always refer to it as Haley's dancing with the actor, because I really see the two of you start to dance together. And it brings out so many more colors in terms of what's happening in the moment, dramatically, what the character is going through. Will you just speak a little bit about, in terms of your understanding of psychology and how you tune into your collaborators, what is that experience like with you and actors?
All that matters is story, emotion, and performance, because that's what's going to make the movie work or not work. All the other stuff is kind of window dressing. And I learned that when I was a director. Especially as you go up higher and higher in levels of filmmaking, you're working with people that are better and better and better at their job,
That's right.
Which means that there is a reason that they got to be that good at that, which is that they were probably very myopic, they were perfectionists, they wouldn't take no for an answer, they were really, really good at putting their little cog into the machine. If I'm an operator and I messed something up or I saw a little microphone come in, most operators or most DPs or anybody who sees something wrong with their little part of the world will raise their hand and say, we gotta go again. If that is the performance that I need, then that's the performance that's going to go into the movie. No question, all 100% of the time. And what I don't want to do, I don't want to be the operator that says, I need another one, because then that's going to signal to the director, and especially to the actor, that I care more about myself than I do about the people that I'm ostensibly working with.
I don't know. I don't
that's
know.
amazing.
I can't remember the last time Haley asked for another. Now that I think about it. All right, we asked about relationship to actors, relationship to director. What about relationship to DP?
Now, obviously, the DP is theoretically my closest collaborator, and when the relationship works well, I think it's a wonderful relationship.
Now, there are DPs who light, and then there are DPs who light and also like to frame.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You tend to work with DPs who light because you frame.
Or with DPs who light and are very collaborative with
on the framing
on the framing side.
Right.
Or on the, and again, framing I think is a bit of a misnomer, because it's at the end of the day it's not about whether I'm tilting up or tilting to the right. It's what is the coverage? What are the shots? And what is the concept? Like, if the camera is a character, then what character is that person? Where is that character? Right? There's these sort of larger discussions about how much of a privileged access does the character, i.e. the audience, have to this story.
Right.
And that needs to be curated at all times. So if a DP is collaborative about that, then I'm all in. And if the DP says, no, here's your start, here's your finish, here's what you do, blah, 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 it's fine, but it's really not after...
It's not a fulfilling.
Yeah, after doing 100 movies, which...
Now the way you work with us is, this is why you're also an executive producer, is, you know, we rely exclusively on you, or predominantly on you for the framing, because we understand how important that window is, that imaginary rectangle is, into the audience. It's critical. And the more time you have to contribute ideas, to prepare, to absorb other people's ideas, the better the work is. I want to talk about two shots in Avengers Endgame. They both happen to be protracted shots, but they're both doing very different things. One is the fight in Tokyo with Ronan, right, which was a long oneer. And then the second is also a long oneer, which is Tony's funeral, the death at the end, which for a year we referred to as the wedding.
The wedding, exactly.
So let's start with the Ronan shot, right? Because this was an idea I believe you pitched us. So to give some context to the Tokyo fight, there's a lot of characters in Endgame, right? And
Yes.
Clint in particular has an emotional story, right? He's lost his family, and it's made him incredibly bitter. It's turned him into a vigilante. So as we're sort of meeting characters over the course of this part of the film, we have to introduce you to who they are in the time jump. And Clint in particular has gone to a very dark place. And we needed to communicate, we needed to carve out a little bit of story space, just push with the elbows against the other story around it to serve up to you. He's a vigilante with a new identity that's a much darker identity, and he's going to murder someone in cold blood, and then he's going to be approached by Natasha. Right? We could have tried to do it through a series of edits, which in a weird way may have felt like you suddenly were in a different movie, or we could have done it, which you pitched, through a much longer shot. And I believe the location was chosen first. We had the location.
Yeah, and then we went to visit it.
Right, and then we went to visit it, and you had gone ahead of time and walked us through your idea for how this could unfold. Because in a lot of ways, stopping for a oneer, captured the audience's attention in a slightly different way, would hold their attention because you know you're tracking a story through it and it's going to end somewhere, in a way where editing the sequence might not have had the same impact on them. But talk a little bit about why.
It's such an interesting topic. We could have a 10-hour conversation about the oneer.
I think we did.
I have spent a lot of my professional time, believe it or not, even though I'm a camera operator, talking directors out of oneers. Because generally speaking, for all you young directors out there, I know you all want to do your oneer. However, there's got to be a really compelling reason to do a oneer. The thing that a oneer does really well, it subconsciously imprisons the viewer into a specific point of view. And when I say imprison, I mean imprison, because you realize very quickly that the director will not allow you to quickly jump into another perspective by cutting. So your brain is being told subconsciously, all right, you are now physically an active participant in this world. And we are not going to allow you to magically fly, blip to some other place in the world, which affects the way you
Captures and
view something.
holds attention, right?
It does.
Because there's a linear progression to it. So you're right. It doesn't allow you, oh, we're shorthanding this. No, I have to pay attention because this is leading me somewhere.
That's right.
So it has a different, in the toolkit,
it does.
It is very specific.
And it can often be somewhat claustrophobic. And in this way, that's what I really loved about when I first read the idea, okay, it's night, it's about shadows.
Right.
Our
It's all
protagonist
a lot of
is
it's
a
implied,
shadow,
about a
right?
third of the shot's implied.
Exactly.
Who is he now? Who is this?
Exactly. What better way to tell that story than to imprison the viewer into a POV that he or she can't get out of quickly? That's one of the reasons why I liked the idea of the one.
It's also brutal.
Yes.
He murders a lot of people very quickly over a short period of time, and you're trapped with him. You're trapped with his violence.
Yeah.
So you get a quicker understanding, deeper understanding of who he's become.
Now, unfortunately, I screwed myself a little bit with this because and this happens a fair amount with me, which is why I don't know why I haven't learned my lesson. But I will suggest something which on the surface seems like a good idea, and it could become a good idea, but I realize that I haven't really thought this through very much because so often I'm very excited about this notion, and I've learned working with you guys to be very excited about something, but then to immediately divorce myself from it because then the next best thing is going to come along, which is great. But the first thing, and this is a side note, but whenever I meet somebody that's going to work with you for the first time, I say, they're great, they're awesome, they're really collaborative, but do not fall in love with your ideas. They don't fall in love with their ideas, and you can't afford to fall in love with your ideas. You have to find a great idea, and then just as quickly find the next great idea.
Again, that prioritizing that fidelity to best idea wins. Whenever the best idea shows up, whoever it comes from.
So wait, how did this play out, though, screwing you?
Because it needed to be a oneer, and it was going to be raining, and rain and cameras never mix very well, and rain and Steadicams never mix very well.
Especially when you're pointing upwards.
Right, well that's the next issue, right? And Steadicams are very specific. They're very good at sort of smooth gliding sort of shots, but they're not very good at whip panning. You can set them up in a way so that you can whip pan, but then that makes the smooth glidey part not very, very easy. So it's very difficult to do smooth glidey and whippy.
You can do one or the other.
And at the same time, you have to cover within an inch of its life the camera by all these tarps.
Right,
because it's going to rain. Right. Here's a secret about movie rain. Movie rain is very different from regular rain in that when it's normally raining, the tiny little molecules of like water drop from the sky and it's very lovely. What we're doing when we're creating movie rain is we're shooting fire hoses up into the sky, and then the raindrops are like the size of cockroaches. They have weight to them.
Yes.
Which makes it very difficult to shoot with the camera, especially if you're on a Steadicam and you're trying to do sort of smooth, glidey stuff. And then I realized, of course, that a lot of the parts of this, there were some CG effects, right? But there's also some non-CG effects, and there was an element where I have to tilt straight up, and there's a window pane that's going to be broken, and the stunt player is going to run onto the roof. So that meant, okay, not only do I have to cover the camera, but I also have to cover myself up like the Michelin Man, so that whatever drops on me doesn't potentially injure me. Once that's all done, then we have this sort of moving around for the sword fight. And I have to do whip pans. And I have a spinner, which is this rotating disc that is made out of glass that's put in front of the lens, and when it rotates really quickly, it acts like a centrifuge, and so any water that lands on that disc immediately gets pushed to the side, which is how you can shoot in the rain. But it acts as a gyro. So as soon as you start moving it in different ways, it'll start kicking against you. And so between the gyro and the protection,
so this was a terrible idea.
It was a terrible idea.
By the way, I want to add one more and it's a night scene.
Right.
So you're doing this at 3 a.m.
That's exactly right. Exactly.
Oh, you were on take 11 at 3 a.m.
Well, and the funny thing is that the take that was used was the take where I actually did get injured. One of the shards, and there's not real glass, but it was plexi or whatever it is that they use. It actually, the one place where I couldn't protect myself, I had a helmet on, and this is one, the area right here, where between my protection here and the camera was here, I had a little shard, and literally and the take was going great. It was going really, really well, and I was, and it came down as like, I'm like, ah, shit. And so we continue on with the rest of the take, but it's just like sort of like the blood is sort of, mixing
Bleeding
with the rainwater
art,
coming down this way. I knew it wasn't like life-threatening, but it was like, ah, shit, I can't believe that.
Well, look, I know I'm speaking for Film Fans Anywhere. Everybody's so happy you did that.
No, well,
We're glad you took the pain for the shot.
And my lawyers will be hearing from you.
Exactly.
Tell us how,
as we should.
we all decided on another oneer later in the film.
Yes.
Right? Again, I think for the same reason. Right?
Yes, and that was something that you guys had already planned out pretty much the entire time. Although I feel like I did pitch an idea to you guys on our rehearsal day. Went to the tent, and I think Feige was there. I think Louis was there, and maybe even Victoria. I mean, all the bigwigs were there, and it was you guys, and you had your chocolate mountain there, and it was lovely. And
the chocolate mountain is a collection of little Dove Bite chocolates that we leave.
You just do this all day long.
Exactly, in front of the monitor.
It's how everything gets made. Dove chocolate.
Geoff Haley, in his infinite discipline and wisdom, maybe has 2 or 3.
By the way, so you come in the tent.
So I go in the tent. I had this idea about actually. You probably don't even remember it because it was not that great. But it was the idea that the oneer was actually going to be behind. It was more about the daughter, the progeny. It was like behind, and ending on Tony. Versus starting on Tony and ending on Sam Jackson's character. And you were so gracious because you guys listened intently, and I could feel that you were like, actually your wheels were turning and thinking. But anyway, we wound up not doing that. And after like having left the tent and realizing, and you gave really compelling reasons why it didn't make sense to do that. And especially because you talked about the fact that this shot was as much about fan service and deeply earned fan service. Like the fact is that you're going back through in time. This one shot, you're going back in time to the place where it all started. And that was because I wasn't a huge Marvel fan. I didn't really get that. So thank God you didn't listen.
It's about the larger narrative, right?
Yeah.
So really, putting a button on the larger narrative of the whole thing, that it started with Tony and with Fury. So
the job of that movie too, we always looked at that. Our job in that movie was to close the story.
Yes.
We really wanted to keep the emphasis on the closure.
Yeah.
Because we had been involved for so many films at that point, 4 movies where we were thinking about how the story moves forward. The wonderful thing about that movie on a creative level for us was like there was 0 movement forward.
And the staging of that shot, if I remember correctly, we rehearsed it the day before.
Or a couple of days before.
A couple of days before. Because,
and the security of that was insane.
Well, one, we had there was the potential of a leak that Iron Man was going to die. 2, we had every actor in the world on set for a limited window. So we had to execute this quickly.
I think it is probably the most expensive single shot I was ever involved in. When you take a look at what it took to get people there.
I would argue the most expensive shot in movie history.
Yeah, it
right.
Was
when you
way up
add up the salaries.
Yeah.
We had many people on set that day who've worked in the business for 3-4 decades. Never saw a base camp that looked like that.
The scale of that base camp was significant.
Well, and I had heard that there was a fake base camp across town to
the quote-unquote wedding.
Yeah, so that the paparazzi that did think that there was something going on went to the other base camp.
I can't believe there are any trucks left to rent to create a fake base camp.
Yeah, no, I think there were probably trucks that were made out of like cardboard that were probably just like, okay, wheel it to the fake base camp.
But that shot tracks. We come across this wreath floating in the water with Stark's arc reactor, and then it goes through sort of an hierarchical level of importance to Tony Stark, the entire Marvel universe.
And the speed is really important of the move. I did this paper in college, The Long-Term Efficacy of Visceral versus Empathetic Stimulation, where I put people into MRI machines and gave them different images to look at. One set was a visceral set of images, which was like, skydiving or squirrel jumping or going through, roller coasters. The kind of stuff that essentially raises your adrenaline and your cortisol. And then did the opposite, showing images that were very empathetic, like puppies, all those wonderful feel-good things that YouTube was essentially, founded on. And the study was to see whether the long-term effects were greater with the visceral or with the empathetic. And by putting the same people in the MRI an hour later, a day later, a couple weeks later, and seeing what parts of their brain lit up by showing them the same groupings, you could see that the visceral stimulation wears off quicker. Which is why adrenaline junkies are adrenaline junkies. And that's the thing that I talked to the Pixar folks about when they were doing Up, when I did the lecture at Pixar, because it has to do with camera movement. There's a speed at which you move the camera where it is empathetic, and there's a speed as you start going faster, it turns into a visceral move. And it literally lights up different parts of the brain. And so oftentimes I'm preoccupied with the idea of what is the perfect speed for a camera move.
Do you think you achieved that on that shot?
I think so, but it was on the very, very bitter edge of almost being too fast.
Wow.
Because on the one hand, you got to get through 50 characters and end up on Fury.
You want it to be a 4.5 minute shot.
Yeah, exactly. If there was one shot in that entire movie or all that had to be empathetic, it was that shot.
In all the movies, right? That was probably the most important empathetic shot.
Yeah, I would
all
agree.
The films, yeah.
For sure. Look, this gets beyond the scope of this episode, but it's my dream that we do a documentary at some point solely focused on your psychology studies and research and how that is translated.
We're going to call it visceral versus empathetic.
It's fascinating.
Talk a little bit, though, about how you use musical notes when you're operating, because nobody does this other than you. It's unique to only you, and I like,
Yeah, I mean, I did another study at school that basically the long and short of it is that short-term memory for sound is much better than short-term memory for visual short-term memory. Remember that game back in the 80s called, I think it's called Memory or Simon?
Simon,
it was the big hockey puck that has the 4 tones. So where there are 4
we give you
buttons.
a sequence, beep, boop, bop.
Exactly.
And then you had to replicate
each sequence had a note associated with it and a color associated with it, right? And it turns out by doing a study where you can turn the music off and you can just try to play the game without music.
Much harder.
Much more difficult. So I developed this weird thing that I call a sonic mnemonic, where when we're doing fight scenes or when I'm doing anything that I need to be able to remember quickly, especially if I'm doing a fight scene where there's going to be 4 different or 5 or 6 or 7 different combinations, a punch to the face and then a kick and then a leg sweep and then a groin thing, right? I have to learn exactly what that choreography is going to be, and I need to learn it immediately because we're moving through this fight quickly. I assign a note to a different part of that body. And as I'm seeing the stunt players rehearse it, I sing the tune that comes from singing the notes in the different part of the body. And that tune is very easy to memorize. So when we're about to shoot the sequence, I know that the sequence is da 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 da. So I know it's going to be there, as opposed to having to remember anything else.
This is like so beautiful, it makes me want to weep. I love this process.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Cherry.
Yeah.
Right, won Camera Operator Award for this. Some beautiful camera work in the movie. Pick a sequence that you want to talk about from Cherry. I want to hear a sequence that you want to talk about from that movie.
It's tough to pick one sequence from that movie, partly because of the way that you guys structured it. I thought it was brilliant that you essentially said, okay, we're going to tell 5 stories, and they're all going to be told in different ways. And there's things about each one of the ways that we told that story that I absolutely love.
Different rules, completely different concepts, creative concepts, motivating each story. But it was interesting
for different moments in his life.
To fragment his life. into these chapters.
Yeah.
Right? So that was this big stylistic swing that we all took together.
Yeah.
In telling the story. But if you were to dial into a moment, like take the opening montage. Right?
Yes. Well,
It's really setting the stage for him.
That's right.
For the location, for the world that he lives in, for who he is, the sort of existential crisis that he's in.
Yes. The opening montage of Cherry is so great because it's a series of breadcrumbs too, right? You're intentionally plopping the audience into the middle of something. We don't know what it's the middle of, but we know that there is some shit that has happened beforehand. There's probably some shit that's going to happen afterwards. But we are knee deep into like the intense emotional landscape of this character. And the camera work certainly is meant to reflect that as well. It's deliberate, but also contemplative. Slow motion always implies contemplation, I think, right? Because it's the idea that you're taking time and you're playing with it. And you're saying like, okay, I know in real time this is what happened, but what happened in my mind was actually this thing, which is great. I mean, that's one of the things that the slow motion does really well. And one of the reasons why I think that we did some of the most original work on Cherry over the last number of years that I've worked with you is because it was the least green screeny movie and the least built movie as far as stages and so on. It was practical. So I feel like places are anchors. Places are the opportunity for you to weave the story, and you go into a space and you discover what the story is because of what the space is telling you.
The real elements of it, the age of the space, the location of the space, what's out the window, what's around it.
Yeah.
Where imagination becomes critical.
That's right.
On a soundstage, or especially on a green screen.
Right. I could never have imagined the sort of the anachronistic nature of the shot with Tom Holland walking through his neighborhood.
Looking up at the balconies.
Looking up at the balconies of these kind of shitty, not impressive, implying blue-collar sort of misery to a degree that is then intermingled with these beautiful trees, right? That's just something that I wouldn't have really been able to imagine. But then we showed up there and we saw that, and again, it was an iterative shot that began as like, well, what if we're, you know, maybe in front and maybe we find him, what if we're, and then it turned into, after a number of us sort of started to talk about, like, what if it's something that literally starts away from him and that, you know, finds the balcony and then that sees him and then that leaves him again and then we see the trees and then because we're finding him and leaving him, the subconscious implication to the viewer is you are now being directed about what to see, but you're also independent from the character that the movie is about. So you're given some autonomy subconsciously, right?
Yeah. And Cleveland has interesting enough, this is really the essence of the film, Cleveland has a nickname, one of the nicknames is Forest City, because it sits at the bottom of the Appalachians. And it is intensely forested, and it's a very woody city. It has several major parks, but it's also, its heyday was the Industrial Revolution. So you have all this brutal industrial brick, you know, brownstone architecture littered amongst the trees. So it has this dichotomy, or there's a strong contrast between the natural beauty and what the city is. And that was the essence of what the movie was about. And you were capturing that in a shot at the start of the film, telling the audience, because there are, sweep across factory windows and smokestacks and
yes, that's right, exactly.
Giving you the industrial component of it.
But then the trees come into it, and then suddenly it's this. And I remember being really taken, not just by the location, but also the way that shot came together. I pitched the very same shot to you guys.
The Gray Man?
In The Gray Man. It's almost identical, this shot. And it was, again, a super successful shot because we know this because it's in every trailer.
Yeah.
And it's so similar to that shot that I was almost worried you guys were going to catch me and be like, hey, isn't this the shot from Cherry? But it's literally the shot of 6 walking...
The apartment complex.
The apartment complex. Yeah. And we're doing this sort of move around.
Prague.
It's almost identical to that shot. But again, it's like... Here's this hitman.
Very different, though.
It feels very different, but it's got, to me,
same musical notes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But this is an amazing point because look so it's the same shot, 2 different, very rich environments that are speaking very specifically to the story and the characters that we're exploring on a narrative level. Story is king, like you said. And we're able to find and build sort of a shot that sort of uses the environment to convey emotion and ideas, right? So when we are all on a soundstage like this and we're surrounded by green screen, I mean, one of the most challenging things to camera operators, cinematographers, directors, etc.
Actors,
everybody, everybody involved in creating a reality in an environment like that is that what do we use? How do we use it? So when you're in that kind of an environment where you don't have all that richness around you, how do you adjust to that?
You try to remember what it was about great locations you've been to and just use that, right? What you want is to try to avoid giving away the fact that there's nothing to inspire you in a blue screen stage.
Now, the world that you're visualizing, is it drawn from imagery from the film itself or outside the film?
It depends. It depends on whether or not that world exists. I had no idea what Titan was going to look like. I had no idea because nobody really did. I mean, I know we had some previs for what Titan was going to be like, but
it
so
changes.
many things, and it changes, right? So to a degree, we all have to imagine, and that's where you have to develop your imagination. Like the best thing you can do when you're a parent is to develop the creative imagination of your 1 to 3-year-old, because that will be a direct predictor of how successful they're going to be at all walks of life. Because imagination and creativity is the seed from which all greatness comes from.
Creation.
You know.
Now that is an incredible sentiment. So I just want to thank you for being on this episode today. And I wanted to point out why it's so wonderful working with you as directors, because in essence, in one of the first few shots that we see Cherry on camera, you capture with your imaginary rectangle the essence of what the story is about. This romanticism that's inside the character is in conflict with this profane, gritty elements of his personality. And he doesn't know how to reconcile those two, and he winds up as a drug addict. But that's the essence of what the film is, and that's why it's set in Cleveland, because Cleveland has those romantic and profane elements to it, for us anyways, growing up. But you were able to take that and turn that into a 20-second shot or a 25-second shot. You're able to communicate the theme and the story to the audience by where you point the camera, which is the most important job on set in a lot of ways.
Maybe not the most important, but it's the most fun.
It's critical. It's critical because we've worked with great operators, we've worked with good operators, and there's a big difference between working with a great operator and a good operator. And I think, for us, why you are an executive producer is because, hopefully from this interview, people can see how your mind works, your creative mind, and your storytelling mind. And that's what we prioritize as collaborators, and I think it's important for any aspiring filmmakers out there to understand this. You have to invite in and appreciate and respect and give the proper recognition to the collaborators in your life. That is the most important aspect of being successful as a filmmaker, is reliance on the
and
key,
as a person.
And as a person. Reliance on the key collaborators in your world. And we wouldn't be sitting here today without you, and we're very grateful for that. So
thank you guys both very much, both for the invitation, but also for the amazing collaborative, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years I've had with you. It's been a joy of my career. I hope to do it as long as you'll have me, and I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be able to work with both people and artists of your caliber. Thank you so much.
We are the luckiest people on the planet to have you as a collaborator. Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next time. Mangia bene. Thank you for watching Pizza Film School.
Oh, wow, yeah, man, it's Pizza Film School. About to learn about the movies, man. Whoa, it's real cool.